85%, according to the Prime Minister. The news item itself reads, Prime Minister Sharif Ismail announced that the voter turnout for the first day of elections for the 568-seat House of Representatives on Sunday stood at 15 to 16%. Ismail told reporters on Monday that he predicts the percentage to improve on the second day of voting for the first phase of the elections, which covers 14 provinces, excluding Cairo. The High Elections Commission had announced on Sunday by midday the turnout stood at 1.198%. Out of nearly 27 million registered voters, so voter turnout increased at the polling station later in the afternoon. Ismail pointed out that the government had given its workers a half-day leave in a bid to boost the turnout. Poll observers, however, estimated a lower turnout than what was quoted by the Prime Minister. The International Local Mission to observe the parliamentary elections said between 11 to 13% voted on Sunday. The next item we have is from Al-Ahram Online. It reads, Egypt's cabinet orders half-day off Monday for state employees on second day of voting. The news item reads, Egypt's cabinet gave state employees a half-day off on Monday, the second day of voting in the first stage of the country's parliamentary elections. The government had already designated on Monday a holiday for all schools in the 14 governorates which have been slotted for the first day of voting in the 2015 parliamentary elections. Some 27 million voters are registered to take part in the election's first round on Sunday and Monday. The first stage will include 14 governorates, which are Giza, Fayoum, Bani Suef, Minya, Asyut, the New Valley, Suhail, Qina, Luxor, Aswan, Red Sea, Bahira, Alexandria and Marsa Matruh. According to the High Elections Committee spokesperson Omar Marwan, voters included 13 million women and 14 million men. The first round will choose 226 MPs of the total 596. There are 2,573 electoral candidates for the first round. The stations are expected to close at 9 p.m. The next item from the Daily News of Egypt that reads, more than 185,000 members of the armed forces to take part in securing the elections. The news item itself reads, the General Command of the Armed Forces announced that more than 185,000 armed force members are set to participate in securing the upcoming elections with the police. Security forces are securing 18,945 polling stations in the first round of elections that kicked off on Sunday and Monday. The General Command of the Armed Forces said that they had taken the necessary preparations and procedures to provide a safe climate for millions of Egyptians to take part in choosing who represents as ordered by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Meanwhile, General Mahmoud Higazi inspected the central military zone to check the forces' level of readiness. Higazi made sure that the forces understood the duties and missions they are assigned, along with the coordination of efforts with the Interior Ministry in governorates in order to provide the appropriate climate of voters to cast their votes in complete freedom without allowing for an attempt to influence their free will. We're joined on the line by our reporter Basma Taha from Mbeba, who will update us on the voting process. Good afternoon, Basma. Basma. Basma, are you with me on the line? Basma, can you hear me? Okay, there seems to be a technical problem. We'll get back to Basma and find out more about what's happening in Mbeba. We move on to the next news item that we have from RT. Egypt's election 2015 voting begins in the country's first parliamentary elections under President Sisi. The news item itself reads, Egyptians began voting Sunday in the country's first parliamentary elections since President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi took office. The much-delayed polls of the Egypt's 595-member parliaments are expected to provide political stability to Egypt. The elections will take place in two phases, concluding in early December. A total of 27 million people across 14 of Egypt's 27 governorates are eligible to vote Sunday and Monday in the first phase. We're joined on the line again by Basma Taha from Mbeba. Can you hear me, Basma?
Hi, Riham. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon to you, Basma. Well. Could you tell us a bit about what's happening in
Riham,
Mbeba?
I am now at school.
Yes.
As you know, it belongs to Giza governorate, where 48 candidates are competing for 4 seats. Let me tell you that I am now in one of the polling stations. The turnout now is moderate, but it is expected to increase. A few hours and voting will start. People start to flock to the polling stations. Now the turnout, as I said, is moderate. There is a huge participation for women and also for the elderly people. They believe that this election is very important, and their voices will lead to more security and more stability in the country. There are also here members from the international organizations to supervise the elections. Also, there is a huge efforts exerted from the security forces in order to secure the voting stations and the surrounding areas, so people would feel free and secure at the same time. Also, people wish that the coming parliament would meet their demands concerning the better health and better education, also agricultural products. They hope that the coming parliament will lead to more security and to a better flourishing future for Egypt. Also, they wish that the upcoming parliament could solve most of their problems.
Did you manage to speak to any of the international observers? If you did, what kind of impression did you get out of them?
They are supervising the elections, as I said. When I asked them about any violations committed so far, they said no violations. Everything is going smoothly. Also, everything is organized. That's it.
What about the turnout rate? You were saying it was moderate or relatively low compared to previous elections. When you spoke to voters, did they give you a reason as to why people aren't turning up in bigger numbers?
Sorry, Riham, I can't hear you. Would you please raise your voice?
Obviously, the turnout rate is not as high as it usually is in terms of elections. When you spoke to the voters there, did they try to explain why the voter turnout is not as high?
Riham, I can't hear you.
Okay, well, Basma, we'll get back to you again later on to find out more. Thank you so much, Basma Taha from Mbeba. We move on to the next item from the World Bulletin that reads, Egypt begins long-awaited parliamentary elections. The news item reads, Egypt begins voting in a long-awaited parliamentary election on Sunday, the final step in a process that was meant to put the country back on a democratic course, but which critics say has been undermined by state depression. Egypt has no parliament since June 2012, when a court dissolved the Democratic main chamber, then dominated by the Brotherhood group. Egypt's constitution passed by referendum before Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi won a presidential vote in mid-2014. Endows the new parliament with new ranging powers in a televised speech on Saturday. President al-Sisi called on all Egyptians to head to the ballot boxes and urged the armed forces and interior ministry to secure the voting process, as well as ensure that voters' safety is at the utmost presence. We're joined right now on the line by Linda Abdulatif from Al-Haram. Linda, can you hear me?
Good evening, Riham.
Good evening to you, Linda. Could you tell us a bit about the voter turnout? I can see behind you it's a bit more crowded than the other correspondents out there.
Well, relatively, it's a little bit low at that time in comparison to the early morning when the school gates were not open yet. People were gathering in groups outside the polling stations or outside the school gates in order to cast their votes. Now, in the early morning, once the polling stations were open, people started coming in a fair number, we can say. Then the numbers started increasing gradually. Now, during the break, or starting from 2:30 till 3:30 p.m., people were not permitted, or the voters were not permitted to get in, so they were standing outside the school gates. Now, the numbers which were actually standing outside the school gates were good somehow. Once the polling stations opened, people started getting in good numbers. In comparison to the current time, no, the current time is relatively low.
Do you have some sort of approximate idea of the amount of voters in terms of percentage for your area? For instance, let's say there are 5,000 voters registered. An approximate percentage of how many have turned up so far?
Well, in the early morning or yesterday, well, actually, the total number here at Hisham Shita School is 15,021.
Yes.
In the early morning, before the start of the day 2 of the voting, the percentage was around 10%.
Yes.
Now, we're still waiting in order to know the exact numbers. So we have to wait until around like 8:45 in order to know the turnout of...
Yes. But why do you think that the turnout rate of the voters has been lower than usual in other elections? Did you manage to speak, for instance, with some voters who spoke about it?
Maybe because, as we've witnessed here, most of the voters, it seems that who are registered here at Hisham Shita School are the elderly.
Yes.
Maybe this might be actually a reason why they're not coming in big numbers. Maybe because the majority might be from the elderly. That's why. Because the majority right here at this time in the 2015 parliamentary elections, we've seen that the majority are the elderly and the disabled.
Yes.
So this is the reason actually.
Did any international observers come to the school where you're posted at?
Well, yes. Yesterday we had representatives or observers from the Arab League. We also had observers from the Embassy of Singapore and from the Embassy of Romania. Now, the Arab League or the Embassy of Singapore refused to speak with the media, but the Embassy of Romania, the observers representing the Embassy of Romania told us that they are very surprised with the organization. They praised the organization. They praised also the heightened security measures that are taken inside the school and in the surrounding area as well. Now, as for today, observers from the British Embassy, and we had observers as well from the Embassy of Croatia, but both refused to speak with the media. There were also actually journalists as well from international news agency.
Did you manage
or just monitoring or just checking the voting process of the elections.
Did you manage to speak to any of those journalists that are from international newspapers, for instance, and get their
Yes, I
impression?
did, but they refused to talk because they told me we're just like you are. We are journalists, so we cannot speak or give any information regarding the voting process.
Okay, Linda Abdul Latif, thank you so much for joining us on the line. That was Linda Abdul Latif from Al-Haram to give us more updates on the situation there on the voting process. Let's get some information in about the voting process itself. Egyptian voters head to the polls yesterday and today. This is the second day for the first phase of the parliamentary elections. The polling stations opened from 9 and will close at 9 p.m. Cairo local time. The vote marks the final step of the roadmap of transition to democracy. The election law designates 3 categories for the seats, which is 596 seats of House of Representatives. Those elected through a party list, which represents 120 seats or 20% of the parliament. Those elected individually, which are 448 seats or 65% of the seats. And those appointed by the president, which are 28 seats or 5% of the parliament. The law also uses the list system to fill quotas of underrepresented minorities. Each 15-candidate party list must include 3 Christians, 2 workers or farmers, 2 youth candidates, a disabled person, and Egyptian residing abroad. 7 of the 15 candidates must be women. Elections are held on October 18th and 19th, with a runoff on October 27th and 28th. The results will be announced on the 29th and 30th of October. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister Sharif Ismail declared a half-day holiday today for workers to give them a chance to take part in the elections. Right now, we're joined on the line by Rana Al-Assas from the Elections Commission headquarters. Good afternoon to you, Rana.
A very good afternoon, Riham. I hope to find you here safe and sound, Riham. Riham, as the elections go on this afternoon, today marks the second and the last day of the parliamentary, the first phase of the parliamentary elections, where all the Egyptians go to choose the member of parliament who will be representing him or her at the House of Representatives. The Higher Electoral Committee reported that till now, the election process is smooth and held under very tight security supervision. Higher Electoral Committee spokesman Omar Marwan just concluded a few minutes ago a press conference, or an hour ago actually to be precise, press conference where he said during the press conference that the electoral body continues providing all the logistics for holding a free and fair election. As for experts voting process, Marwan reported that Kuwait represents 40% of the entire percentage of the expert votings and the highest voting till now. And as we all know that we are waiting for the turnout of the or the results of the elections, the expert elections now, we are waiting, and I'll be back with you to tell you more about the experts results and who won and who didn't, and more details. I earlier reported, and again I'm reporting, that 4 injuries took place today among the judges. 1 died and passed away. 68 voting ballots opened late this morning, and this was among the obstacles that faced the electoral process this morning. Most importantly, Omar Marwan pointed out to the fact that there will that the elections today will not be extended, and that today is the last day of the first phase of the parliamentary elections. Riham, this is all I have for the time being, and until a press conference is held, we're all here waiting for a press conference for the results of the expert votings to be issued, and when this happens, I'll be back again with you, updating you on the latest we have here at the Higher Electoral Committee.
Okay, Rana, thank you so much for the update. But if you could also look into the fact that the turnout rate, ask about the turnout rate, maybe with the officials there, maybe they're going to explain that in the next press conference. That was Rana Assas from the Higher Elections Commission headquarters. Thank you so much for joining us on the line and giving those updates to us. Let me give you some more information about today's election. Prime Minister Sharif Ismail is following up on the parliamentary election's second day of voting from the operation room in the Cabinet Information Centre. Ismail held video conference calls with governors of the 14 governorates in which the votes in the first phase of the election is held. The Premier followed up on measures to secure the votes and means of facilitating the process. Early reports from the operations room, headed by Minister of Local Development Ahmed Zaki Badr, showed that a number of polling stations in Buhaira, Asyut and Bani Suef opened late. Campaigning executives are also reported in El Buhaira and Luxor governorates in violation of the electoral silence. Let's talk about the role of the armed forces in securing the polling stations. The Minister Sidqi Subhi has allocated helicopters to transfer judges overseeing the parliamentary elections to remote areas and villages. This as the armed forces has begun implementing measures to secure the polls, putting more than 185,000 officers and soldiers on high alert. Meanwhile, the Armed Forces Chief of Staff Mahmoud Higazi visited forces in the central military zone to check for their readiness. For its part, the Ministry of Interior announced a state of emergency as forces and explosive sappers were deployed at polling stations where the election process was held. Let's take a short break and then come back with more information on the electoral process.